Hey guys, what's up? I'm CJ and welcome back to my galaxy. Today we are talking about the Hunger Games. Once again, I have not made a Hunger Games video in ages, I think. I've been very inconsistent with my upload schedule for the past year because I've been very busy with uni, but I am definitely getting back into like a regular upload schedule, and you guys will see that on my channel coming up. But we're talking about specifically the 25th Hunger Games today. And if you've watched my channel for a while, you guys will know that I'm actually very obsessed with the 25th Hunger Games. I think the most popular video on my channel is actually about the 25th Games, and that's really where a lot of my subscribers have come from, is that video. So I assume you guys are also obsessed with the 25th Hunger Games, the first quarter quell. We have like very little information about the first quarter quell and what it was about and all of that stuff, but when Sunrise and the Reaping came out, we got some extra information because it's the first quarter quell, and then Sunrise and the Reaping is the second quarter quell. So obviously, like, there's a little bit information, a little bit of extra information in Sunrise on the Reaping, and we're going to discuss that information today, and specifically about what happened to the victor and what the information we know now from the Sunrise on the Reaping, what possibly could have happened to the 25th Hunger Games victor. The thing that inspired this video is the fact that I saw a theory on TikTok specifically that there was potentially no 25th victor, at least there's no victor now, there's possibly never ended up being a victor, and we're going to get into that theory in general later in the video, but I want to first go through the information we do currently have about the 25th Hunger Games, basically everything that's canon and we know for sure, or at least the things that we've been told for sure happened with the 25th Hunger Games. So let's go through it. When we start with catching fire, we know that we're going into the third quarter quell. So Katniss kind of tells us as the reader what she knows about the 25th Hunger Games. And we know going into it, there's a twist for every quarter quell. And the first quarter quell meant that the twist was the district voted in their tributes. So there was a voting system, and we don't know how exactly the districts decided who to vote in, whether it be like people they didn't like, maybe people that they thought had a better chance at winning, that whole thing, but they were voted in, and it was particularly sadistic to vote in your own tributes. And I think Haymitch even in Sunrise on the Reaping mentions how cruel that idea is. In Catching Fire, we don't get much more information about the first quarter quell than that. However, when Katniss and Peter decides, in Catching Fire that they're going to become career tributes in order for one of them or two people to return home, one tribute, one victor, and one mentor to return back to District 12. So they're training, and Peter asks Effie to send over the tapes of the remaining living victors. And that essentially means that whoever's living just gets sent over. If anyone has passed by then of the victors, then the tapes don't get sent through, which leads to us not having the 25th Hunger Games tapes, which is very interesting. They specifically mention it, that they don't, when they go to watch Haymitch's games, they say, let's have a look at the first two quarter quells. We don't have the first one, but we have Haymitch's games, and they say, let's watch Haymitch's games, and they essentially assume that the 25th Hunger Games victor is dead. Now, we don't know that for sure, as we know Katniss is quite an unreliable narrator, and as we know from Sunrise and the Reaping, there's also a lot of propaganda going on with the tapes of the Hunger Games. So obviously we don't know for sure what exactly is going on. We don't know what has happened to the 25th victor, but obviously in Sunrise and the Reaping, we get a little bit more information, not a whole heap, but it is enough for us to begin theorizing what actually happened with the victor. Right before the tribute interviews with Caesar Flickerman for Haymitch's games, Caesar Flickerman actually goes and reflects on all the Hunger Games that came before the 50th Hunger Games, one of which was the first quarter quell that they focus on as well. And they kind of like highlight the importance of the evolution of the games, which I could do a whole different video on it. Let me know if you guys want to see that. But essentially what happens with the 25th Hunger Games, the first quarter quell, there are quite a number of changes made to kind of make it this big celebration of 25 years of Hunger Games. So I'm just reading my notes here. Lucky Flickerman, he was the host of the Hunger Games still in the 25th Games, obviously, and then at some point Caesar Flickerman takes over and he interviews a very old Dr. Gall, and I think Haymitch uses the word decrepit or something along those lines. He basically refers to her as like a really old hag of a woman, which is exactly how I personally describe her. She essentially coined the term, "May the odds be ever in your favor." And it says specifically, which I find very interesting actually. In the text, it says credited, the phrase is credited to Dr. Gall, which I think is, there is room for interpretation that perhaps Dr. Gall was credited with it, but she didn't come up with it. And that whole phrase, and I could make also a whole nother video. I'm going to be bringing it out very soon, possibly next week, about it possibly being coined by Snow rather than Dr. Gall, but Dr. Gall got the credit anyway. So once again, that is propaganda that we're seeing with the 25th Hunger Games. Very heavy with the propaganda with all 3 quarter quells, and that is how you're supposed to interpret it, is that it's quelling the rebellion every 25 years. So you need to kind of bring up new propaganda for the new generation every time. This is also the first time we see a tribute parade when they're welcoming all the tributes on a chariot, and the capital and obviously all the other districts on TV get to see the tributes traveling along the road. And also the first time there is a new single-use arena, as we see in the 50th Hunger Games and all the way up to like the 74th, 75th Hunger Games with Katniss. There is an arena that, in being single use, eventually is used as kind of a holiday spot, as we know with Katniss telling us as the reader that it's eventually used by the capital as a holiday spot and as a tourist destination where capital citizens get to tour around the arena and replay all of the different deaths that happened during that specific Hunger Games, which is a very special kind of out of touch by the capital citizens. I know they're raised that way, but that is like insane that they do that. Okay, so that is everything we know about the 25th Hunger Games. What I find interesting is that there is no mentions of a victor. So as we get into the theories, I want to pull out the evidence of what is making me think specifically about the victor of the 25th Hunger Games. Now, in the same kind of passage where right before the tribute interviews, we see that Haymitch pays close attention to a kind of replaying of the 10th Hunger Games. As we know from reading The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, the 10th Hunger Games also reinvented the games, from them going from kind of like a bloodbath of people killing each other, district tributes killing each other, to an entertainment source at the hands of Snow and Dr. Gall, obviously. So they have to bring it up, but Haymitch mentions that the victor is someone from District 12, he just doesn't know who it is. So he tries to figure out who the victor is, but he doesn't end up finding out because there were so many complications with it. Dr. Gall has her own special like archives of one copy of the 10th Hunger Games, but when it comes to Caesar Flickerman reflecting on these games, all they mention is the innovations and the arena and what happened with it progressing to the Hunger Games they have by the 50th Games. They don't mention the victor at all. And like I said before, they also don't mention the victor of the 25th Hunger Games, simply the fact that there were innovations for the first quarter quell as a celebration for 25 years of the games. So I think it's interesting, and a very interesting correlation between the 10th and the 25th Hunger Games. There was no victor mentioned. So it leads us to believe that there were a number of complications with the 25th Games, similar to the 10th Games, that they had to edit out any mention of who the victor was. And I think I said this earlier in the video as well, there's also complications with both the 50th Games and the 75th Games, because the quarter quells, they're there to ensure the new generation understands that the capital is in charge and that the districts don't have any power under President Snow's rule. So the rebellion gets to a point of ruining the games every time a quarter quell comes along. So it's very safe to assume something similar happened with the very first quarter quell, and that's the reason that they were doing it, because things were coming to a head once again. So they introduced a quell, and to make sure that the propaganda really held strong in the districts. So what exactly went wrong, and what does this have to do with the victor specifically? Well, there are a number of things that I definitely think could have happened, and different paths that just we could go down. And I'm gonna mention all of them and the possibility that I think it could have happened in this particular way. The idea that I find so interesting and that I mentioned was the inspiration for this video was that there was no victor of the 25th games. And I just find this whole idea just the most interesting out of all of them. It compares the 74th games to the 25th games. So as we know, with the 74th games, Peter and Katniss say, no, they have to have their victor, and they try to take the Nightlock berries and kill themselves so they won't have a victor. And it kind of like scares the Capitol and Seneca Crane into allowing 2 victors to ensure that they do actually get a victor. This theory essentially suggests that Katniss and Peter were the consequence of the fact that they didn't have a victor in the past, that in the past where a lot of things went wrong, that in, say, the 25th games, they didn't end up with a victor because they killed themselves or they didn't get them out of the arena in time. As we once again know with the 25th, the 74th Hunger Games, as soon as Katniss and Peter are pulled out of the games and out of the arena, Peter immediately gets surgery to ensure he survives after they're no longer being covered by like live footage, which they are kind of being covered, but the reason that they cover the footage with Peter dying and him getting immediate medical aid is to ensure they are able to skip over the fact that they use Nightlock berries to kind of kill themselves or almost kill themselves and trick the Capitol into doing as they say. So there's no victor mentioned for the 25th Hunger Games because essentially there wasn't a victor. They couldn't manage to get the person out of the arena in time, either because of the medical emergency, and the technology wasn't up to the point it was to save Peter for the 74th Hunger Games. Or they essentially pull what Dr. Gould tried to do with Lucy Gray and was just like let her die in the arena and not have a victor. So this time, because Dr. Gould seems to be such a big face of the 25th Hunger Games, Dr. Gould gets her way and there is no victor because something went so wrong that she said just let them die. And the victor killed themselves, or Dr. Gould sent some sort of mutts into the arena to make sure the victor did not get out alive. The idea of there being no 25th victor is just like so interesting, and that would essentially lead to why they have so much technology to ensure the victor does survive the games in the future, because Snow doesn't agree with the fact that they shouldn't have a victor. Except by the time they get to the 74th Hunger Games, Seneca Crane goes as far as giving 2 victors to the Capitol rather than just the one, and not manipulating them and letting them like manipulate him. Snow obviously not very happy about that, but that makes sure Snow's idea of having a victor is completed, whereas Dr. Gould would have just let them die. All of a sudden, by the time they get to the 74th Hunger Games, Snow is understanding why Dr. Gould didn't want Lucy Gray to survive and potentially the 25th Hunger Games victor. Like, he really understands that by then. The next theory would be, did they break out of the arena the same way that Haymitch broke out of, or tried to break out of the arena, tried to destroy the arena? Haymitch almost died in the process, and potentially did the 25th victor also have something like that? And that's why they had like a way, like they had a backup generator for the arena. Did they have like a backup plan for the 50th Hunger Games because it's already happened to them in the past? So they had ways in which of fixing the arena, like how they sent in like the interns that ended up being killed by Maisley and the person from I think District 1 or 2, those tributes ended up killing the interns. Did they have those plans essentially because the 25th Hunger Games also went that bad and they needed a way to fix the arena quickly and without ending up with the capital like knowing what was happening. I think that one is a little less plausible, but there's a possibility in some way they broke the arena, and that's how Beatty got the idea to try and break Haymitch out, and his son try to break the arena in some way that the capital couldn't fix it. So they tried it in the 25th games, they tried it in the 50th games, and they tried it in the 75th, and eventually for the third quarter quell it did actually work. Obviously they could have tried the same thing in between the quarter quells, and they very likely did, because like why would Beatty just give up at that point by the 50th games and just like try to do something else for 20? Beatty's characterization is just not like that. They wouldn't just like not do that for 25 years, but he could have gotten the idea from the 25th games, and that's why he tried it in the 50th. The last theory would be, did the 25th Hunger Games victor disappear in the same way that Lucy Gray kind of disappeared? You know, like she disappeared, but she was potentially murdered by Snow, potentially ran away from District 12. We don't actually know for sure what happened with Lucy Gray. In Sunrise on the Reaping, I do know that there is a grave site for Lucy Gray, but that doesn't mean there was a body, and it doesn't mean we know for sure what actually happened to her. The reason I bring up this kind of theory is because of the way that Snow reacts to the victors' families in the future. Is there a reason why, like, Lucy Gray goes missing and they don't have a victor to parade around the next year? We know that Snow keeps the victors alive and looking well enough, whether or not they're like actually going crazy like Annie Cressler and going insane and very mentally ill, but he parades them around to be like, we have this control over you districts, like you can't do anything, because the victors, they're little pawns to keep you in control. And they control the victors by controlling the families, by like killing them off, saying that we'll kill your families if you don't do as we say. So they keep the victors in line to parade them around, and instead of like killing the victors themselves. Otherwise, what would the capital find entertainment in if they didn't have their victors to have a parasocial relationship with? The capital couldn't have a parasocial relationship with Lucy Gray and essentially forgot about her because Snow disappeared Lucy Gray, and they couldn't do anything with her. They couldn't bring her on a victory tour, but they could bring Mags on a victory tour. Did they possibly find out the hard way from the 25th victor and the 25th Hunger Games that they had to keep the victor alive for the parasocial relationship? So they had to manipulate the families and the victor using the families, because they found out that when they disappeared the 25th Games and Dr. Ghoul went too far, that they had to keep the victor alive. I don't think that the 25th victor just like died like a regular of natural causes death. That definitely is not what happened, because of the way that we know that the Hunger Games is set out, the way that we know Dr. Ghoul and Snow act. Something happened with the 25th Games, but just like the rest of the quarter quells for the 50th and the 75th, something really big happened, and that's why I'm so obsessed with it, is because there's something that went wrong with the other two quarter quells. What happened with the 25th Games? I desperately need to know. Because of the way in which each games improves upon the last one, especially with the quarter quells, and there's such a stark difference with what went wrong with the 25th, with the 50th Games and with the 75th Games. I think that there's definitely similarities with what happened the first quarter quell, but what went wrong definitely would have been different, because they wouldn't have let what happened with the 25th Games happen with the 50th Games, but they obviously became very safe with what was happening with the third quarter quell, because Snow had all of these things to make sure that it went right, but he wasn't playing it too safe, because by that time they had a rat, Plutarch, who was working on the inside, and he was the game maker. Snow essentially became a little bit too egotistical, I guess. Like, he was playing it as though he knew already what was happening. He wasn't going to make the same mistakes Dr. Ghoul did for the 25th Games. He wasn't going to make the same mistakes with the 50th Games. So he was essentially blindsided by Plutarch. And I would argue that just because Katniss was luckier and they had a very similar plan doesn't mean that the 50th Games and the 75th Games was like what went wrong was the same. I don't think just because Haymitch like blew up the force field and they didn't escape, I think that it's still very different in that way. What went wrong was still very different. So what I believe the most is that there was no victor of the 25th Games. Like you guys, from this video alone, I think you know that's my favorite theory and the one I believe in the most. There was no victor. It's not that they just like disappeared. I think very well it could have been, all the theories I've presented to you, are theories like I've thought about and did come up with, and I can elaborate on further in another video if you guys would like. But I think the one that is most plausible is potentially like there was no victor, and that's why it led to the 74th Hunger Games. As I said, like in each game's improving on the last, they had to ensure that there was a victor, because at some point there wasn't a victor. There's a lot of ideas, essentially, is what I'm saying, is of what happened to the 25th Hunger Games victor. There are so many things that unless it's confirmed, I'm just always going to be talking about the 25th games. Like, I'm always going to be presenting you guys with new evidence of what could have happened and presenting like new ideas, because unless Suzanne Collins confirms who the victor is and exactly what happened with the 25th games, in the same way that like we know Haymitch's games and what the propaganda was with it. There is so much propaganda, I know for a fact, with the 25th games because of Haymitch's games and his tapes, and I just need to know. I need to know what actually happened, and one day I can assure you guys I will, because Suzanne Collins, I'm gonna make her do it. I'm gonna make her tell us at some point. Mark my words. But that is it for today's theories, guys. Let me know in the comments down below what you think happened to the 25th Hunger Games victor. What happened exactly with the first quarter quell? What went wrong? What happened? Do you guys think like what we'll ever know what exactly happened? Let me know in the comment section down below. Hopefully you guys liked this video, and if you did, please like and subscribe, and obviously comment down below your thoughts on today's videos and your own theories on today's video. Once again, guys, I hope you enjoyed this video, but I've been CJ, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye.